The wind came rolling in off the high plains, kicking up dust devils that danced along the split-rail fences and whispered through the cedar shingles of Caleb Ward's porch roof. He stood there in his Sunday shirt stiff with starch, brushing his palm nervously over the carved oak ring in his pocket. The kind of ring a man made when he had more hope than gold. He had imagined her small, maybe soft-spoken, the kind of woman who mended shirts by lantern light and filled empty silences with humming. What stepped down from Amos Reed's wagon was a thunderclap of a woman broad-shouldered, tall as a fence post, with a steady gait and calloused hands that looked like they belonged more to a ranch foreman than a bride. Nora Holt's boots hit the dirt with a solid thud. 6 feet of muscle and sun-browned confidence wrapped in a traveling coat worn at the elbows. Caleb blinked up at her. The letter she'd written, delicate cursive, full of gentle wishes and quiet dreams, had not mentioned she could probably deadlift a steer. The silence between them stretched like barbed wire. Amos Reed, ever the meddling merchant, coughed into his hand and mumbled something about checking the wagon's axle before fleeing the scene. The neighbors, already gathering like flies on molasses, watched with thinly veiled amusement. Mrs. Larson leaned into her husband and whispered something sharp. Little Jimmy Carver pointed outright before his mother slapped his hand down. Nora's voice, low and calm, cut through the murmur. "You must be Caleb." Her handshake swallowed his. Firm but careful. Her eyes didn't mock, but they didn't pity either. "I suppose we should talk," she said. No words could have better captured the awkwardness than that simple, honest phrase. She wasn't what he expected. And judging by the glance she gave his thin frame and nervous posture, neither was he. "What do you think of Nora's arrival?" Like and comment below to share your thoughts. As Amos unloaded a trunk large enough to hide a black bear, Caleb felt his stomach twist. This wasn't what he'd planned. This wasn't the peaceful, docile companion his letters had quietly begged for. But Nora wasn't turning away either. She walked the perimeter of his modest ranch with a quiet kind of assessment. She didn't sneer at the patched corral, didn't flinch at the outhouse leaning slightly east. When she noticed the vegetable garden, she nodded like she'd seen something she liked. But the land held more than crops and chores. The land held whispers of loss, of judgment. And a shadow moved among the murmurs. Jacob Carver. That evening, as the sun sagged into the hills like a tired old drunk, Carver's boys wandered too close under the guise of curiosity. Carver himself stayed at a distance watching. He said nothing, but his stare lingered like gun oil on a saddle, a reminder that the West didn't just test a man, it measured him silently, brutally. Nora's presence had unsettled the balance. Not just for Caleb, but for men like Carver who believed the world turned a certain way with men in charge and women behind. Inside the cabin, quiet fell hard. "I'm not sure this is what you signed up for," Caleb said at last. Voice full in the one-room home. Nora shrugged off her coat and hung it without ceremony. "No, but neither did you." They didn't speak again that night, but something unspoken was shared, something more binding than contracts. Two strangers on the edge of something wild. Outside, a storm gathered, not in the sky, but in the unseen space between fear and courage. And Carver watched silent still. The first morning Nora spent on the ranch dawned clear and quiet. Caleb had hoped the awkwardness from the day before might have dulled overnight, but silence still hung heavy between them like the last breath before a storm. That storm came not from the sky, but in the form of 2,000 pounds of muscle and horn, named Dakota. The crash of splintering wood jolted Caleb from his half-sipped coffee. A second later, the unmistakable bellow of a furious bull echoed through the valley. "Dear Lord," he whispered, stumbling to the porch. From his perch, he saw the wreckage. The north fence was completely down, busted like it had been hit by a runaway wagon. Dakota, his prize bull, stood 3 properties over in the middle of Mrs. Larson's flower garden, stomping through hydrangeas like a biblical plague. Neighbors were already scrambling. Men shouted. Ropes flew and missed. 2 of the Carver boys darted back behind trees as Dakota snorted and lowered his head, preparing another charge. Caleb wrung his hands. I reinforced that fence just last week. Beside him, Nora appeared calm as ever, sipping her own coffee. Fence didn't fail, she said quietly. Someone pried it loose. Caleb turned to her, heart pounding. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away, only pointed toward the ragged posts. No splinters, no breaks, just clean pulls like someone used a crowbar. Caleb followed her gaze. Sure enough, it wasn't a crash, it was sabotage, and only a handful of people knew Dakota was penned there. Carver's name burned in the back of his mind, unspoken. We need to stop that bull before someone gets killed, Nora said. Caleb was already halfway off the porch. Wait, he's dangerous when he's like this. You can't. But she was already moving. Long strides chewing up the earth. Caleb scrambled after her. Mrs. Larson was shrieking at the top of her lungs. Flowers trampled, rocks scattered, and now Dakota had turned toward a new arrival, young Timmy Larson, who'd foolishly tried waving a rake at him. Time slowed. The bull pawed, snorted, lowered its head. Timmy, run. Someone screamed. The boy froze. Nora vaulted the fence in one motion, shouting not at the bull but at Timmy. Get behind me! Her voice cracked like a whip. Timmy obeyed, trembling. Nora turned to Dakota, stepping between him and the boy, arms out. You're not mad, she murmured. You're scared. I know that look. Same look my father's bull had right before he gored a man clean through a feed shed. Dakota huffed, steam pouring from his nostrils. The onlookers stood in silent horror. No one moved. Even Carver, leaning on a fence post, said nothing. But his eyes were sharp, calculating. Then Nora did something wild. She dropped her arms and walked forward. No rope, no stick. Just her voice and a presence that even the wind seemed to respect. Hey, big fella, she said, stepping slow. You remember Barnes' warm straw, that itch behind your ear? She kept talking as she neared him. Dakota's ears flicked. His hooves stopped digging. Then, like a prayer being answered, his head lowered slightly. Nora reached out, touching the thick fur behind his ear. She scratched, and Dakota sighed. The tension snapped. The bull leaned into her hand like a puppy. Gasps rose from the crowd. Someone bring a rope, she called. Amos Reed bolted. Within moments, she had Dakota haltered and led him away down the dirt path like she was guiding a tired mule. Murmurs filled the air. No one had ever seen anything like it. How incredible was Nora's bravery like? And comment to let us know your favorite moment. Carver approached Caleb, then smiling without warmth. She's quite the woman, he said. You sure you can handle her? Caleb said nothing, but he saw the look Carver gave the fence, and he knew. Back at the ranch, Nora was brushing dust off her sleeves when Caleb approached. You think Carver did it? He asked. Nora's jaw flexed. He's the only one who benefits from seeing you humiliated. Your bull loose your bride, saving the day. It makes you look weak, makes him look strong by comparison. I don't care how I look, Caleb muttered. You should, she said. Not for your pride, for your safety. They walked to the broken fence together. I'll help you fix it, she said, picking up a post like it weighed nothing. But we'll reinforce it, not for Dakota, for the man who loosened it. That night, the townsfolk still whispered about Nora, the bull tamer, the giant woman with hands that soothed beasts. But Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. One thought echoed louder than any gossip: someone in this valley wanted to break him. And Nora, She just might be the only reason he was still standing. That night the ranch was too quiet. The windows were open, letting in the scent of fresh pine and churned earth. But the silence inside the cabin pressed down heavier than the ceiling timbers. Caleb sat at the table, elbows on the wood, staring at his calloused hands like they might suddenly tell him who he was supposed to be. Across the room, Nora moved with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown all day, cleaning, stacking tools, resetting the kettle on the stove. But she didn't speak. Not because she was angry, Caleb realized, but because she respected the silence he was clinging to. Or maybe she recognized it. Maybe it was familiar to her too. He heard her folding something. Turning slightly, he caught sight of the letter he'd written, the third one, the one where he'd tried to sound brave while confessing that the loneliness was eating him alive. She folded it with care, then tucked it back into the same inside pocket he'd seen her reach into earlier that day. She kept his words. That alone made his chest tighten. But the voice that whispered in the back of his mind wasn't kind. It sounded a lot like Carver's, smooth and smug. She's quite the woman. You sure you can handle her, handle her. Like she was a wild horse or a burdensome tool, not a person, not a partner. Caleb stood abruptly. The chair scraped across the floor. Nora looked up but said nothing. I know what folks are saying, he muttered. That I ain't man enough. That I'm weak. That you're the one wearing the boots in this arrangement. She didn't answer, just waited. I didn't think it'd matter. That you were taller, stronger, hell, smarter in a lot of ways. But out there today, with Carver's boys watching, with him watching. His voice faltered. She walked over, calm as ever, and set down a mug of coffee beside his hand. I watched you run straight into a field with a raging bull to try and stop me from getting hurt, she said. That doesn't read as weak to me. I didn't do anything, he whispered. You didn't stop me, she replied. That's something. He shook his head. No man around here would have let a woman do what you did. They'd have stepped in, made a mess, maybe gotten themselves killed. But they'd do it anyway. Because they think being a man means always taking the lead, even when they don't know what the hell they're doing. Nora leaned on the table with both hands, her eyes level with his. You ever notice I didn't ask for saving? She said softly. I didn't come here looking for someone to carry me. I came here because I was tired of being told I don't belong anywhere. She pulled out a small pouch and placed it on the table. Inside were several worn photographs and a folded newspaper clipping. My last employer, she said, tapping the clipping, fired me after I wrestled a cow from drowning during a flood, said it made the men look bad, told me to stop shaming my betters. She gave a bitter smile. I've been too much for most men and too little of a lady for most women. But you wrote about sitting quiet by the fire, about planting squash and listening to the wind. You wrote about kindness. Caleb looked down, ashamed. I wrote about a version of myself I wanted to be, he said. And today, she said, you were him. The words landed harder than anything Carver had thrown at him. For the first time since she arrived, Caleb looked her in the eyes without flinching. I don't know how to be enough for a woman like you, he admitted, but I know I want to learn. That's all I needed to hear, she replied. And somehow that quiet admission broke the invisible wall between them better than any declaration could. Outside, the night stretched vast and black across the valley. But inside that cabin, two people finally sat side by side, not because they had to, but because they chose to. The next night, a hush settled over the prairie like a warm quilt. Crickets chirped their slow rhythm and the stars blinked awake one by one over the ridge. Caleb and Nora sat on opposite ends of the porch, the distance between them thick with questions neither had yet found words for. The wooden ring sat between them on the railing, catching silver starlight. Nora leaned back in her chair, arms folded loosely, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. "This isn't what either of us pictured, is it?" she said quietly. Caleb rubbed his hands together. "No, it ain't." He paused. "But maybe that's a good thing." Nora turned slightly toward him, her profile caught in the moonlight. Strong jaw, tired eyes. Not tired from work, tired from years of being misread, misplaced. "You ever feel like the whole world expects you to fit a shape that just ain't you?" she asked. All the time Caleb replied, the words tumbling out before he could guard them. "I'm not the man my father was," he continued. "Or the kind the other men around here tip their hats to. And sometimes I wonder if that means I'm failing at something invisible, something I was supposed to be born knowing." Nora looked down at her hands. "I got tired of being looked at like a problem that needed solving. Too tall, too strong, too stubborn. I thought maybe out here I'd just be Nora, not a lesson or a spectacle." She reached into her dress pocket and withdrew a carefully folded letter. She smoothed it with her thumbs. "You wrote once that you weren't looking for someone to complete you," she said. "You were looking for someone to understand you." Caleb chuckled softly. "I didn't think anyone would actually answer that kind of letter. Figured it sounded foolish." "Well, it didn't sound foolish to me," Nora said. "It sounded honest." She picked up the ring between them, ran her fingers over the grain. "You made this," she said. 3 months of carving and sanding for someone you'd never met." Caleb nodded. "I started it the day your first letter arrived. Wanted to feel like I was building something while I waited." "It doesn't fit," she said simply. "I know." Nora smiled softly, not with pity, but with something gentler. "That ain't a failure, Caleb. That's just wood." She held it out to him. "Resize it with me," she said. "Show me how to carve. I'll teach you how to fix a saddle and read cattle eyes. We'll swap skills." Caleb stared at the ring in his palm. It was too small for her finger, just like he'd feared. But suddenly it didn't feel like a symbol of inadequacy. It felt like the start of a shared plan. He looked up. "You really want to do this?" Nora nodded. "But only if you're asking because you want to. Not because the letters promised it. Not because I tamed your bull or fixed your fence." Caleb stood slowly. His knees creaked, his heart louder than his boots. "Nora Holt," he said, voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Will you marry me? Not out of duty, not because of any damn contract, but because I believe we can build something good here, together." She stood too, taller than him, broader, but that didn't matter. "Yes," she said, then added with a grin, "But I have conditions." Caleb's brows rose. "Conditions: I want to resize this ring together," she said. "I want to learn how to work wood. And I want you to let me teach you what I know about cattle and horses and the land." A smile broke across Caleb's face. "Deal." They sat back down, but this time there was no distance between them. Only the night wind and the rustle of cottonwoods whispering approval. For the first time, Caleb no longer felt like a man trying to prove his worth. He just felt chosen. Autumn came in on a whisper, cloaking the valley in deep golds and rust reds. The wind lost its sharp bite and turned cool, contemplative, like it was slowing down to listen. At the Ward Ranch, life found a rhythm, uneven at first, then steady. The fence was rebuilt stronger now, double reinforced with iron nails Caleb had bartered for in town. Nora showed him how to brace a corner post properly, and he in turn taught her how to use a hand plane to smooth oak until it shined like river rock. The wooden ring sat on the workbench between them most evenings. They sanded and reshaped it together, carving not just to resize it, but to give it new life. What had once been a symbol of hopeful naivety was now becoming a testament to effort, intention, and patience. The townsfolk took notice. Gone were the whispers of mismatched intentions or sideways glances about who wore the pants. Instead, there were handshakes, smiles, and most surprising requests for advice. More than one man quietly asked Caleb what kind of wood best suited a carving blade. More than one woman lingered by the porch watching Nora chop firewood with graceful power and wondering out loud if she might teach their daughter to ride. Even Carver kept his distance. One evening, under a sky the color of blue steel and burning clouds, Caleb slipped the finished ring into his pocket. Nora was down by the edge of the corral checking the new foal's leg. Dakota stood nearby, calm, now docile, almost respectful, as if recognizing the woman who had once stood down his storm. Caleb walked toward her, heart-thudding boots crunching dry leaves. She turned at the sound, brushing hay from her palms. "You got that look," she said, half teasing. "What look? Like you've rehearsed a speech but forgot the words halfway through." Caleb chuckled nervously and reached into his pocket. He held out the ring. "I know we've talked. I know we've worked side by side. But I want to ask proper. The way I meant to the day you arrived." Nora's face softened. "I carved it again," he said. "Not to make it perfect, but to make it real, like us." He took a breath, steadied his hands. "Will you marry me, Nora Holt? Not because a letter said we should, not because of the way folks look at us, but because I think we've found something worth building. Not just a ranch, but a life." Nora stepped closer. The fading light caught her eyes, clear, sure. "Yes," she said simply. "And I want more than your promise. I want your partnership." She took his hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. This time it slid home perfectly. "I want to raise cattle with you," she said. "To carve more rings if we have to fight off storms and rumors and whatever else this land throws at us." Caleb swallowed past the tightness in his throat. "And I want to learn from you. About horses, about strength that doesn't look like mine. I want to walk beside you, not in front of you, or behind." They stood together, quiet as the sky deepened. The wind stirred the grass. The foal nickered gently. Nora nudged him with her shoulder. "You going to kiss your fiancé or just stand there quoting poetry?" He did. And it wasn't fireworks or violin music, it was better. It was grounding, like the first rain after drought, like the first fence post driven straight. Back at the porch, Caleb placed a second ring on the table, this one carved by Nora. Smaller, a bit rougher, but made with care. "For you," she said. "You don't get to be the only one who makes promises out of wood." He laughed. "It's beautiful. It's real," she replied. "And it'll hold, like them." 6 months later, autumn had deepened its grip on the valley, blanketing the hills in a patchwork of amber and fire. The harvest moon hung low and full, and the smell of pine smoke drifted through the morning air. In the small clapboard church at the edge of town, Caleb Ward stood beside Nora Holt with his heart thudding in quiet disbelief. They had dressed simply. Caleb wore a fresh-pressed shirt and the same boots he'd worn every Sunday for a year. Nora wore her hair in a braid that reached down her back and a blue dress borrowed from Amos Reed's sister, taken in at the waist, let out at the shoulders. On her hand gleamed the oak ring they'd carved together. On his, the cedar band she'd shaped herself. No lace, no fanfare. Just them standing under a crossbeam of rough-hewn timber, surrounded by neighbors who had once doubted and whispered but now nodded with approval. Even Jacob Carver sat quietly in the back row, his arms folded across his chest, eyes steady. When Caleb glanced his way, the man offered a small nod, not of surrender but of respect. The preacher's voice was soft, barely louder than the wind stirring the windows. He spoke of commitment, of shared burdens, of choosing to stand together when the world turned harsh. Caleb didn't hear every word. His focus stayed on Nora, her calm, her strength, the warmth in her eyes when she smiled at him like he was something worth keeping. When the vows were done, they didn't kiss with ceremony. Nora simply reached for his hand and pulled him close, their foreheads touching. The moment held more weight than any scripture. The reception was nothing more than coffee and sweet bread on the church steps, but it tasted better than any feast Caleb could remember. Later they walked back to the ranch together. The sun was low, casting long shadows. Dakota watched them from the corral, chewing slowly as if even he approved. Life was different now. The ranch ran smoother than ever, not because it was easier, but because it was shared. Caleb handled the books, planned the planting, repaired the tools with quiet precision. Nora took charge of the animals, broke the new Mustang without breaking its spirit, and hauled feed sacks with ease. They taught each other, argued, gently laughed in the evenings. There was no need for one to lead and the other to follow. They walked side by side always, and the town took notice. People who once questioned their match now came seeking advice. Young couples asked how they made it work. Widows brought pies without excuse. Even Carver's wife asked Nora to teach her daughter to ride. But more than the respect or the productivity, it was the peace that Caleb valued most. He no longer measured himself against other men. He no longer worried if his shoulders were broad enough or his voice loud enough. Nora had never needed him to be more than he was, and in that safety he'd grown into a man stronger than he'd ever imagined. One crisp evening, as the sun bled across the fields and the wind curled around their porch like a dog settling in, Caleb turned to Nora. "Think we did all right?" he asked. Nora, cleaning her fingernails with a pocket knife, glanced up. "You mean the wedding, the ranch, or us, all of it?" She leaned back, squinting at the horizon. "We're not done," she said. "But yeah, I think we're off to a good start." He reached over and laced his fingers through hers. The ring still fit smooth and solid, carved by hands that once trembled but now held steady. "Then let's keep building," he said, and in the quiet under a sky wide enough to hold every hope, they did. The story of Caleb Ward and Nora Holt offers profound lessons about resilience, partnership, and authenticity. It teaches us that true strength lies not in conforming to societal expectations, but in embracing our unique qualities and supporting one another. Caleb's vulnerability and Nora's unapologetic confidence show that mutual respect and shared effort can overcome doubt and adversity, building a life rooted in trust and understanding. Their journey highlights the value of perseverance as they transform challenges like sabotage and judgment into opportunities for growth and unity. The story reminds us to value partnership over pride, to learn from those different from us, and to carve our own paths despite external pressures. It's a testament to the power of choosing connection over competition. If this story inspired you, share, subscribe, and comment below to share your thoughts on the video.